The coach reached Calder Springs at 4:30 on a cold Tuesday in October, and Cora Mercer was the last passenger to step down. She was 31 years old, in a gray traveling dress that had been clean when she boarded 2 days and 400 miles back, and she carried one bag and nothing else. The bag was heavier than it looked. Most of what was in it was a single iron skillet, black with 30 years of seasoning, and she had carried it out of a burning building once and would not be parted from it now. A small crowd had gathered by the freight office. Word had gone around that Lyle Stannard's bride was coming in on the afternoon stage, and a town that did not get much in the way of events had turned out to see her. Lyle stood at the front of them in a good coat, with his thumbs in his vest, a man of 46 who owned the forwarding office and a third of the lumber that came through it, and who had written away for a wife the way he ordered anything else, by letter, expecting it to arrive, matching the description. She came down the step and set her bag at her feet and looked at him, and she watched his face change. He had imagined someone younger. He had imagined someone soft. What he saw was a woman with a steady, plain face, with hands that had worked, with a pale burn scar running from her wrist to the inside of her elbow where the sleeve fell back. He saw 31, and he had told the town 24. He saw a woman who would not flatter him, and standing in front of the people he sold to and borrowed from and meant to impress, he made a decision about his own pride faster than he made it about her. "There's been a mistake," Lyle said. He said it loud. That was the cruelty of it, that he pitched his voice to carry, because a quiet word would have spared her and cost him, and he had never once in his life chosen that trade. He said the agency had misrepresented the particulars. He said he was a careful man, and a careful man did not proceed on false particulars. He said a few more things, each one landing on her in front of 40 people, and then he took the folded papers from his coat and waved them. The solicitation she had answered in good faith, as though the paper were a verdict and not a promise he was breaking. Then he put the papers away and turned and walked back into his office, and the door shut behind him. The crowd did not leave right away. People rarely do. They stood and looked at her standing alone by her bag, and they stored it up, the way towns do, to be told again over supper. Cora did not cry, and did not call after him, and did not pick up her bag. She stood with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and she let the cold come up off the boards, and she waited for the next thing, because in her experience there was always a next thing, and the only choice you had was whether you'd be standing up when it came. What Lyle Stannard did not understand, walking back into his warm office and feeling clever, was that he had just made the worst trade of his life in front of witnesses. He thought he had sent away a problem. He had sent away the best thing that would ever stand on that platform, and within 6 months every soul in Calder Springs would know it, and so would he. A man came around the corner of the freight office leading a tired bay horse. He was about 38. Tall, worn at the edges in the way of a man who runs a hard place alone. His name was Asa Holt, and he kept the way station 3 miles out on the Cheyenne Road, the stop where the stage changed teams and the passengers got their dinner, or used to, back when his cook could be trusted near a stove. He had come into town for nails and a barrel of flour, and he had seen the whole thing from the corner, the rejection, the papers, the door. He stopped a few feet from her. He was not a man who rushed at people. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. "No," she said. He looked at her the way he looked at weather, taking the real measure of it. He had a station that was dying because the food coming out of it had gone bad, and a stage company that was about to take its dinner contract somewhere else, and a girl and an old man depending on him, and no idea in the world how to fix any of it. He had not come to town looking for a wife. He had come for flour. "I run the Holt place on the Cheyenne Road," he said. "Stage stop. We feed the through coaches. My cook quit on me in August, and the man I hired to fill in poisons everybody slow." He paused. He was not a man who dressed a thing up. "It's honest work and a roof and pay. It's 3 miles of cold between here and there, and nothing else for a woman who's just been left standing." She held his eyes. "Can you cook?" he asked. And there it was, the only question that mattered, asked plainly by a tired man on a cold afternoon. She had been measured and found wanting twice in 1 hour, by a town and by the man who'd sent for her, and now a stranger had asked her the one thing she knew the true answer to, and her whole life turned on what she said next. "I cooked 3 meals a day for 31 men at the Mercer house in Tin Cup for 2 years, she said, through a winter that killed the cattle and a summer the flour weevilled. Not one of them ever left my table early or hungry." She did not raise her voice. "Yes, I can cook. If you have ever been measured by people who never bothered to learn what you were actually made of, stay with this one to the end, because what that woman did with a black iron skillet over the next 6 months is the reason I make these. Watch what happens when the world throws away something it never bothered to weigh." Asa Holt looked at her a moment longer. Then he picked up her bag, felt the weight of it, and didn't ask. "Then come on," he said. 3 miles. There's a girl out there who'll be glad of you. To understand what Lyle threw away, you have to know where Cora came from, because nobody is born able to feed 31 men through a killing winter. That kind of steadiness is built, and hers had been built the hard way. She had grown up in a home for foundlings in Council Bluffs and aged out of it at 16 with a change of clothes and a Bible she couldn't always afford to keep. She took work in a boarding house kitchen because it came with a cot, and she found out there that she had a thing most people don't, which is patience with fire. She learned the difference between a stove that's lying to you and one that's telling the truth. She learned to taste a pot and know what it was missing before it knew itself. By 19, she was running that kitchen, and the boarding house was full because of it, and the woman who owned it never once said thank you, which Cora had already understood by then was the usual arrangement. She met Daniel Mercer when he came through with a freight outfit and ate 4 days running at her table and proposed on the 4th. He was a good-natured, soft-handed man with a head full of plans, and the plan that took was an eating house in the mining camp at Tin Cup, where there were 800 hungry men and not one decent place to sit down to a plate. They built the Mercer house with money he borrowed and work she did. He charmed the customers in the front, and she ran the kitchen in the back. And for 4 years it was the best table on the western slope, and men walked an extra mile of mountain to eat there. But Daniel borrowed the way some men drink, a little more than was wise and always meaning to stop, and when the silver dropped and the camp thinned, the notes came due all at once. He took it badly. He took it the way soft men take hard news, by promising it would come right and not telling her how bad it was, and the night the lamp tipped in the storeroom and the building went up, he ran back in for the cash box that had nothing in it, and he did not come out. Cora came out. She came out through the kitchen with her arm on fire and her mother's skillet in her good hand, because the skillet was the one thing in that building that was hers and not the bank's. The scar on her arm was from that night. The skillet was from that night, too, and from 40 years before it, the only thing her mother had left at the foundling home with her, wrapped in a flour sack with no note. The debt swallowed the rest. The bank took the lot of it, and there was nothing over, and a 31-year-old widow with a burned arm and a famous reputation, and not $1 discovered what the country does with such women, which is nothing at all. So when Lyle Stennard's solicitation came through the agency, a forwarding man in a growing town wanting a capable wife, she had read it twice and signed her name and spent the last money she had on the ticket, and she had not lied about one particular. She was 31. She could keep a house and a kitchen and a ledger. She was not soft and never had been. He simply hadn't read it. Men like Lyle don't read the thing in front of them. They read the thing they want. The Holt place sat where the Cheyenne Road bent around a stand of cottonwoods, a long, low station house with a barn, a corral, a well, and a string of fresh teams kept for the stage. Inside, the main room was a stage company dining room of the plainest kind. 8 tables, a long counter, a big black range at the back that had been a good stove once and had been let go. The girl was named Nell, She was 12, narrow, watchful, with her hair in a braid that somebody had given up halfway through. Her people had come through on a wagon 2 years back and died of the same fever within a week of each other, and Asa had buried them and kept the girl, because there was nothing else to be done with her, and because, though he'd have denied it, he couldn't have done otherwise. She did the work of a grown woman and said almost nothing. When Cora came through the door with her bag, Nell looked at her the way Jack in the old story might have, like a thing she had seen a version of before and didn't intend to be fooled by twice. The old man was Pruitt, who tended the teams and the barn, and had been at the station since before Asa's father died. He took one look at Cora's hands and one look at the burn scar and said nothing, but he set a chair by the stove for her without being asked, which from Pruitt was a speech. "The range," Asa said, by way of showing her the place. "It draws bad on the left, and the oven runs hot on the right, and the man before you cooked everything the same and called it the stove's fault." Cora set her bag down. She crossed to the range and opened the firebox and looked in, and she put her hand flat against the iron, and she walked the length of it the way a doctor walks the length of a patient. She opened the oven and shut it. She found the damper and worked it once. "The stove's fine," she said. "It's just been lied to." That first night she cooked with what was in the larder, which was salt pork, beans, old flour, a sack of withered onions, and 3 eggs Nell admitted to keeping back. It should not have smelled like anything. It filled the station house and rolled out across the yard, and Pruitt came in from the barn early, sniffing, and even the horses seemed to notice. Asa came in last, hung his hat, and stopped 2 steps inside the door, and something moved across his face that he set down before it could finish. Nell ate with her eyes going between her plate and Cora and back. Halfway through she put her fork down and said, flat, that the last cook had burned everything he touched, and once made a stew that made Pruitt sick for a day. "Nell," Asa said. "He did, though," Nell said. "Burned food is a serious matter," Cora said, eyes on her own plate. "I don't take it lightly." Pruitt made a sound that in a younger man would have been a laugh. Nell looked at her a moment longer, then went back to eating, and she finished everything, and she sat at the table a little while after she didn't need to, which Asa noticed and said nothing about. By the end of the first week, the through coaches had started to notice. The Platte line ran 2 coaches a day each way past the Holt place, and they had been stopping there for 12 years to change teams and feed the passengers. And for the last 2 months, the passengers had been climbing back into the coach hungry and saying so. A stage stop lives or dies on its dinner. Word travels the line faster than the coaches do, conductor to conductor, agent to agent, and the word on Holt House had been bad enough that the company had begun quietly to plan around it. Now the word started to turn. A drummer who'd suffered through the old cook's cooking in September came through again in the 3rd week of October, sat down braced for the worst, and ate chicken and dumplings that stopped him talking, which his traveling companion said had never once happened in the years they'd known him. A circuit judge going up to Cheyenne took a second helping and asked who was back there. A woman traveling with 2 children, the kind of passenger who usually fed her own, out of a basket, rather than trust a road stop. Let the children eat at the counter and ate herself and went back to thank the cook, and found a plain woman with a scarred arm at the range, who only nodded. What none of them knew, and what mattered more than any of it, was that the Platte line had already decided to move the dinner contract. This is the thing the whole story turns on, so hold on to it. A stage company doesn't pay a station just to change teams. The money is in the meals. The company contracts 1 stop on each stretch to be the dinner stop, the place the schedule is built around, where every through coach halts 40 minutes, and every passenger is fed at the company's table for a fixed price, and the company pays the contracted house by the head, every day, in cash. For a station on the Cheyenne Road, the dinner contract was the difference between a living and a slow death. Asa had held it for 12 years. He was about to lose it. He was about to lose it to Garrett Buell. Buell kept a roadhouse on the near edge of town, a newer, bigger place with a painted sign, and Buell wanted the dinner contract the way a man wants the thing his neighbor has. His food was ordinary, and his prices were high, but he had two things Asa didn't. He had a wife, Loretta, who ran the front of the house with a hard charm and knew how to flatter a company man. And he had Lyle Stannard, who as the forwarding agent in Calder Springs handled the line's freight and had the ear of the division office, and who had let it be known he favored moving the dinner stop into town where, he said, it would be more respectable, more convenient, more in keeping with where the country was going. The truth, which Lyle didn't say, was that Buell paid him a quiet cut on the freight, and the busier Buell's house, the more freight Lyle handled and the more Lyle made. So the decision was effectively made before Cora ever stepped off that coach. The division agent, a man named Halloran, was due to come through in November to inspect both houses and sign the contract, and everyone who knew anything knew it was a formality. The town had already decided. The Buell house was the coming thing. The Holt place was 3 miles out on a bend in the road with a bad cook and a worse year, and its time was over. Loretta Buell made sure the rest got decided, too. She came to the Calder Springs General Store on a Friday and stood at the counter near Cora, who had walked the 3 miles in for yeast and coffee, and she delivered, in the warm voice of a woman who has practiced it, her concern. She spoke of how people were talking. She spoke of the strangeness of the arrangement out at Holt's, a woman left at the depot by a respectable man one week and installed under another man's roof the next. No marriage, no kin, no chaperone, just the two of them and a girl, and an old hand at the edge of nowhere. She wondered aloud what kind of woman that made Cora, and what kind of cooking a person learned in a mining camp full of men, and she let the words do their work and bought a paper of pins she didn't need and left. Cora set her coins on the counter one at a time and carried her yeast and coffee out and walked the 3 miles back. 31 years old, and she had been weighed by women with prepared voices in enough rooms to last her. She knew that another person's measure of her was not the truth. She had learned that at 16, in the home, the day they told her what she was worth. But she also knew exactly what Loretta Buell was doing and why, and that it would work, and that the Holt place was going under and taking Asa and Nell and Pruitt with it, and that her arrival had not changed that, and might even have hurried it. She stood at the station window that evening, with her hands on the sill, and looked at the cold, flat sky over the cottonwoods longer than she needed to. Then she started supper. Asa came in late from mending the corral and found her at the range. He'd heard about the store. Word came out from town the way it always did. "You don't have to walk in for things," he said. "Make a list. Pruitt can fetch." "I like the walk," she said. He stood there a moment. He was not good at this. "What they're saying," he started. "I know what they're saying." "It's not." He stopped, started over, plainer. "You earned your place here in a week. You don't owe that woman or this town an explanation for it." Cora looked at him. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her in Calder Springs, and he'd said it like it was a fact about the weather. No weight on it, no expectation. She turned back to the stove so he wouldn't see what it did to her. "More wood in the box," she said. "Supper's close. If you've been in that kitchen with her, the one where you cook for people who'll never thank you and walk 3 miles back from people who've already decided what you are, do something for me before the turn comes. Type the word steady in the comments. Type it for every woman who kept standing up when the easier thing was to fold. I want to see how many of you know exactly what that window felt like." The first week of November came in hard and gray. Halloran was expected on the 7th, and the whole road knew it. Loretta Buell threw everything she had at the front of the Buell house. New cloths on the tables, a fresh coat on the sign, a girl hired in town just to pour coffee and smile. Garrett bought a side of better beef and a town baker's bread to pass off as his own. Lyle made certain Halloran would be met in Calder Springs first, taken to a good dinner at the Buell house, shown the town, the church, the bank, the future, before he ever bumped the 3 cold miles out to a failing station on a bend in the road. The plan was sound. By the time Halloran reached Holt's, the contract would already be most of the way signed in his head. Out at the station, Asa stopped pretending it would come right. Cora found him at the barn the night of the 5th, sitting on a hay bale in the dark with a lantern not lit, just sitting. "When we lose the dinner," he said, "we lose the station. Company won't keep changing teams here if the meals go to town. They'll move the relay too. Inside a year, this is an empty house on a road nobody stops on." He said it without self-pity, the way you'd read off a doctor's verdict. "I can keep Pruitt on through the spring. Maybe. Nell, I'll figure something for. There's a family in Cheyenne might." He didn't finish that one. "You've got 2 days," Cora said. "2 days for what?" "Buell's got the town, and Stannard's got the company's ear, and I've got a stove that draws bad on the left." He almost smiled at that. "You fix the stove. I'm not asking you to fix the rest. Nobody could." Cora sat down on the bale across from him. She thought about Tin Cup, about 800 men and a mountain between them and any other supper, about how she'd built a famous house in the back of a building while a charming man took the credit in the front. She thought about how she'd never once in her life been chosen first, and how every single thing she had, she'd earned in a kitchen where nobody was looking. "Let me tell you something about how a stage company actually decides," she said. "It isn't the cloths on the tables. It isn't the painted sign. It isn't whose dinner the division agent eats first." She leaned forward. "It's the line. Halloran answers to the men above him, and the men above him answer to the passengers, and the passengers don't write letters about a clean tablecloth. They write letters about a meal that was worth the 40 minutes, or a meal that wasn't. A company man who's any good knows the difference between a house that performs for the inspector and a house that feeds the line every single day, whether anyone's watching or not." She held his eyes. "Buell's going to perform for Halloran. I'm going to feed him in the same dinner I feed 2 coaches of strangers nobody's grading. And if Halloran is any kind of company man at all, he'll know which one is real." Asa looked at her in the dark. "And if he's not any kind of company man, then you lose the station, and I find work in Cheyenne, and we'll both have known we did the thing right," Cora said. "But he'll be hungry when he gets here. Lyle's plan has him eating Buell's beef at noon and bumping 3 cold miles after. A man's never more honest about food than when he's tired and cold, and didn't think he was still hungry." She stood up. "Light the lantern, Asa. We've got a larder to fill, and I need you to drive me to the Hendricks farm before light. I want eggs that were under a hen this morning, not last week, and I want their winter pork, and I'll pay for it out of my own wages if I have to." He lit the lantern. He looked at her face in it, and something in him that had been bracing for the end quietly stopped bracing. "You're a stubborn woman," he said. "I've been told," she said. "Light's burning. Come on." Halloran came on the 7th, and the day went exactly the way Lyle had built it, right up until it didn't. He was met in Calder Springs at noon. He was a heavy-set man near 60, with a gray mustache and the flat, patient eyes of a man who had been lied to by every roadhouse keeper from Omaha to the Rockies and had stopped letting it show. Loretta Buell met him at the door of the Buell house with both hands and her best voice. Garrett brought out the good beef and the town baker's bread. Lyle sat at the table and steered the talk toward respectability and the future of Calder Springs, and how the dinner stop belonged in town now, where the country was heading. Halloran ate. He said the beef was fine. He said the bread was fine. He said a great many things were fine in the flat voice of a man for whom fine was not a compliment, and when the dinner was done he took out his watch and said he supposed he'd best go see the old Holt place before dark, for the form of the thing, and Lyle smiled, because for the form of the thing was exactly the phrase he'd been waiting 11 days to hear. The coach bumped the 3 cold miles out to the bend in the road. Halloran had eaten a full dinner 4 hours before. He was tired. He was cold. The light was going, and he expected to spend 20 minutes at a dying station, sign nothing, and ride back to a warm bed in town with his decision made. He smelled the Holt place before the coach stopped. It came out across the yard the way it had come out the first night, only now there was a full larder behind it. There was pork from the Hendricks farm, braised down, slow with the withered onions sweetened soft, and a little of the molasses Cora had found at the back of the store. There was a pan of biscuits that had no business being that high. There was a pie. And there was the skillet, the black iron skillet from out of the fire, on the right-hand side of the range where the oven ran hot, doing the work it had done in Tin Cup for 2 years and in a foundling kitchen before that. Halloran came in stamping the cold off his boots, hat in his hand, fully intending to be unimpressed. Asa met him plainly, and Nell took his coat, and Pruitt had a chair all ready by the warm stove. And then they sat the division agent down at a plain table at a dying station, and Cora Mercer fed him the same dinner she'd have fed 2 coaches of strangers nobody was grading. He ate the first bite the way you eat at a road stop, braced. He stopped. He looked at the plate. He took the second bite, slower, and the flat, patient eyes of a man who had been lied to by 1,000 roadhouses came up off the food and looked toward the back of the room, toward the range, toward the woman working it. "Who's back there?" he said. It was not quite a question. "My cook," Asa said. Halloran set his fork down. He sat very still a moment, the way a man does when something old is surfacing. Then he got up, which division agents do not do, and he walked back toward the range, and he stood there until Cora turned around with the skillet still in her hand. He looked at her face. He looked at the scar on her arm. He looked at the black skillet, and then he looked at the food on the range, and something moved in him that took 11 years to arrive. "I ate at a house in Tin Cup once," Halloran said slowly. "Spring of '74. I was running freight then, before the company. There was an eating house up there fed better than anything in Denver. Mercer's, best table on the slope. Man out front, woman in the back, and everyone in 3 counties knew the food came from the back." His eyes stayed on her. "I never met the woman in the back. I always wondered who she was." The station house had gone quiet. Pruitt had stopped moving. Nell stood by the wall with Halloran's coat still over her arm. Asa looked at Cora and understood, all at once, the whole shape of the thing she had not told him. "You're meeting her," Cora said. That was the threshold, and the locked box was open, and everything after it ran downhill toward the thing it had been building to. Halloran did not sign anything that night. He was too good a company man to sign at a stove with his hat in his hand, but he sat back down and finished the plate and had a second and a third of the pie, and he asked Cora questions, real ones, about the line and the larder and how she'd run a house in Tin Cup that fed 800, and she answered them the way she did everything, plainly, in numbers, with no performance in it. And before he climbed back into the cold coach, he stood a moment in the doorway and looked at the warm room and the high biscuits and the black skillet cooling on the range, and he said to Asa, in the flat voice that did not give compliments, that he would render his decision by the company's process in due course. But Lyle Stannard had built his whole plan on Halloran's mind being made up before he ever reached the bend in the road. And by the next morning word had come back into Calder Springs that the division agent had got up from his chair and walked to the back of the Holt place to shake the cook's hand, and that the cook was the woman Lyle Stannard had left standing on the platform in front of the whole town. Lyle could not let that stand. You have to understand what was actually at risk for him, because it was never really the freight cut, though that was real. It was the platform. It was 40 people watching him wave a paper and walk away, and a town that had stored it up and told it again over supper, and now the woman he'd thrown away in public was about to be proven, in public, to be worth more than the whole bargain he'd thought he was too good for. A man like Lyle can survive losing money. He cannot survive being the fool of the story. And he had started to see, the way you see a picture forming, exactly which fool he was about to be. So he did the only thing a man like that knows how to do. He reached for the paper. He rode out to the Holt place on the morning of the 9th, the day Halloran's coach was due to pass back through southbound, timed so the company man would see it. He came with the agency solicitation in his coat, the one Cora had answered in good faith, and he came with Garrett Buell beside him for a witness, and he came with his voice already pitched to carry the way it had pitched to carry on the platform. He found them in the yard. Asa was at the corral. Cora had come out for water. Nell was on the porch step. Pruitt stood by the barn. And down the road, right on schedule, the southbound coach was slowing for the bend, and Halloran's gray head was visible in the window. Lyle stepped down off his horse and held the paper up. "This woman," he said loudly, "answered a solicitation of marriage made by me, in good faith, at my expense. She took my agency fee and my advance, and never made good on the contract. Every word of it was a lie or a twist, and he said it like Scripture. She walked off that platform and set herself up out here, and now I find she's pretending to a reputation she ran out on. A man's owed what he paid for. The company ought to know what kind of woman it's thinking of putting its name behind. I want what I'm owed, and I want it known." It got very quiet in the yard. The coach had stopped at the bend. Halloran had stepped down and was standing in the road, listening, the way a man listens who has heard 10,000 lies and learned to wait for the one true thing. Cora set the water bucket down. She did not raise her voice. She had a thing she could have done, and everyone who's been wronged in public knows the shape of it, the temptation to take the whole platform back, to name Lyle the coward in front of the company man, to make him eat every word he'd said over her bowed head. She had the leverage. Halloran was right there. One true sentence about that platform and Lyle Stannard was finished in Calder Springs. She did not reach for it. Her power had never been in noise. It was in being plainly and provably exactly what she said she was. "You waved that same paper at me on the platform, Mr. Stannard," she said quietly. "You waved it to tell 40 people you didn't want me. You can't wave it now to tell them you did." She let that sit one breath. "I never took an advance. The agency can show you that. I spent my own last dollar on the ticket to come and be your wife, and you sent me away in front of the town to save your pride, and you'd do it again this morning if it served you. That's not a debt I owe. That's a thing you did." Then she picked the bucket back up because there was water to carry and a coach to feed, and she turned to go in. Asa Holt had come across the yard while she spoke. He stopped beside her, not in front of her. He looked at Lyle, and he looked at the paper, and he spoke low and even, in the voice you use for someone you are not afraid of. "There's no contract here for the company to worry over," Asa said. "She's not pretending to a thing. The man who ran your freight just ate at her table and walked to the back of the house to shake her hand, which is more than he did for your beef at noon. You didn't ride out here about a fee, Stannard. You rode out here because you're about to be the man who threw her away, and you can't stand the size of the mistake." He stepped closer, just one step. "Get back on your horse. You're not owed anything here. You're just early to finding out what everybody's about to know." Lyle looked at Asa. He looked at the coach in the road, at the gray head of the company man who had heard every word. He looked at Garrett Buell beside him, who had gone the color of a man watching his own contract evaporate. And he looked, last, at Cora, standing there with a water bucket, and the straight back she'd had on the platform, and whatever he was looking for in her face, the satisfaction of having rattled her, the chance to be owed something, it was not there. It had never been there. He put the paper away. He got back on his horse. He rode out, and the cold morning closed behind him, and Garrett Buell rode after, and the southbound coach took on its passengers and went on south with Halloran's flat eyes, having seen the whole of it. If you have ever wanted to take the whole room back from someone who humiliated you and chosen instead to just be, quietly and provably, the better thing, then you already understand the woman in that yard, and you understand why what came next was never really in doubt. Halloran's decision came by letter to the station 9 days later in the company's plain hand. The Platte line was pleased to confirm the Holt House on the Cheyenne Road as the contracted dinner stop for the southern stretch, effective the 1st of December, at the standard rate per passenger meal, the contract to be reviewed annually on the strength of the line's correspondence. There was a second sheet in the same envelope, not company business, a few lines in a private hand. Halloran wrote that he had eaten in a great many houses in 30 years on the road, and that the test of a house was never the meal it cooked for the inspector, but the meal it cooked for the strangers nobody was grading, and that he had known whose table was real before he'd finished the first plate. He wrote that he was glad, after 11 years, to have finally met the woman in the back. He did not mention Lyle Stannard. A man of his sort did not need to. The contract said it all. By spring, the bend in the road had a name on the line. Coaches that could have changed teams anywhere planned their day around dinner at the Holt place. Passengers wrote the letters Cora said they would, and the letters went up the line, and the rate held and then improved at the annual review. Asa hired a second hand and then a girl from town to help serve, and Pruitt got to spend his days with the teams he loved and his evenings by a stove that finally drew right. The money he'd been about to use to bury the station, he used to put a real floor in the dining room and a second stove in the kitchen, and Cora stood at that second stove the day it went in and ran her hand along the cold iron and said it would do, once it learned to tell the truth. Garrett Buell's roadhouse kept on in town, smaller than it had hoped to be, feeding the people who didn't go out the Cheyenne Road. Loretta found other things to be concerned about, and other women to be concerned too, and the concern about Cora quietly went out of fashion in Calder Springs the way fashions do, because it is hard to keep up scandal about a woman the whole county now drives 3 miles to eat from. Lyle Stannard still owned the forwarding office and still handled the freight. But the freight ran heaviest now toward a station he'd sworn was finished, and every load of it that crossed his desk was a small daily account of the trade he'd made on a cold afternoon in October. He took to having his dinner at home. He did not ride the Cheyenne Road if he could help it. Asa asked Cora to marry him on a Sunday in April, and he did it the way he did everything, plainly, without dressing it finer than it was. They were on the porch in the evening, and the teams were quiet in the corral, and he'd been fixing the step she'd never once asked him to fix. And he sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "I sent you back a wife's wages in March," he said. "You're not my cook. You haven't been for a while, and I've been calling you that out loud because I was afraid to call you the other thing and have you say no." He set the hammer down. "I'm not a man who has the right words, but I'd like you to stay, as my wife. If that's what you want, and not because there's nowhere else, because there's plenty of places would have you now, because you'd choose to." Cora had been chosen last her whole life, when she was chosen at all. She had been a foundling nobody claimed, a worker nobody thanked, a wife whose husband ran for an empty cash box, a bride a man waved a paper at and walked away from in front of a town. She had built everything she had in the back of rooms while other people took the front. And here was a tired, decent, honest man who had crossed a platform for her before he'd thought it through, who had stood beside her and not in front of her, who had asked her once, on the worst afternoon of her life, the only question she'd ever known the true answer to. She took the time choosing for herself that she had never once been given. Nobody hurried her. The teams shifted in the corral, and the spring light came long across the yard. "Yes," she said, "that's what I want." Asa let out a breath he'd been holding since October, and his hand found hers, and the worn step held solid under them both. They were married in June, in the dining room of the Holt place, between the noon coach and the evening one, because Cora would not close the dinner, and Asa would not have asked her to. Nell stood up beside her in a dress that had been finished properly for once. Pruitt gave her away. and pretended the whole way through that his eyes were watering from the stove. Halloran came down on the company's pass and ate 2 pieces of pie and shook Asa's hand and told him, in the flat voice that did not give compliments, that he was a luckier man than he probably knew, which from Halloran was a wedding toast. By the time the next October came around, a year out from the platform, the Holt place was the busiest stop on the southern stretch, and Cora Holt stood in a kitchen with 2 stoves that drew right, with a girl who called her by her first name and meant it like something warmer, with an old man dozing by the fire and a husband coming in at the same hour every evening and stopping 2 steps inside the door to smell what was on. The molasses had gotten into the walls the way it does, and the warmth had gotten into the place, and the bend in the road that had nearly been an empty house on a road nobody stopped on was the place the whole county drove out to. On the shelf above the kitchen window sat the skillet, the black iron skillet, the one thing she'd carried out of the fire, the one thing her mother had left wrapped in a flour sack with no note. It wasn't on the shelf because it was done working. She still cooked the wedding pies in it and the Sunday pork. It was on the shelf because in that kitchen it had finally come to rest among things that were also hers and not the bank's, in a house that held its warmth and wasn't waiting on anyone's leave to keep it. And that was the story of Cora, a woman a man waved a paper at and left standing in front of a whole town, who picked up her one heavy bag and answered one plain question with the truth, and built everything that actually mattered out of a black iron skillet and a spine that would not bend. Here is the thing I keep coming back to, and I think you feel it too. The people who throw you away are almost never weighing what you're worth. They're weighing what they want you to be, and when you don't match the picture in their head, they call it your failing, and walk off feeling clever. But the picture in their head was never you. You were always the thing in the bag they didn't bother to lift, the work done in the back of the room while they took the front, the steady hands they mistook for plainness, because plainness was all they knew how to see. And the quiet justice of a life, the only kind that lasts, is that you go on being exactly what you are until the day someone tired and cold and honest finally asks you the right question, and your true answer turns everything. Lyle Stannard waved a paper. Cora Mercer set a black skillet on a hot stove and let the work speak. One of them is remembered in that county still. It isn't the one who did the talking. So tell me, in the comments, the moment someone measured you wrong and you outlasted the measure. One line. I read them, and there are more of you out there than you think who know exactly what that platform felt like. If this story sat with you, share it with the one person in your life who's been the work done in the back of the room, the one nobody thought to lift, and let them know you see what they're carrying. Stay with this channel for the next one. There's always someone the world threw away too soon, and there's always the morning they find out what they had.